Again, I'm Jason Odell, and thanks for joining me today. I'm going to talk about the new features that were added to Lightroom, both Classic and Lightroom CC, which is the cloud version of Lightroom. And these were just added to the Creative Cloud subscription about a week and change ago. So I'm still going through them, but there's a couple new things that I wanted to share. So I figured I would jump into Lightroom and show that. So give me just a second to share my screen images. So Adobe added 3 features, 2 of which are actually pretty useful. One is just kind of there. So I'm going to talk about those 3 features and show you how they work and give you some ideas of how you might want to use them. So the 3 features in sort of alphabetical order, I guess, are lens blur, HDR, and which is HDR visualization, and lastly, something called the point color editor. Okay. Now, of these, blur and the point color editor are going to be the ones that you're going to want to use. The HDR tool is actually a very specialized feature for people with special HDR monitors, which is probably none of us. So unless you're running a $8,000 HDR monitor, but the other stuff can be quite useful. So I wanted to start off with the sort of the point color feature and why that's useful. So let me start with this. So here's an image that I captured up in Maine last week, and I'm going to go into the develop because that's where all this stuff is. Okay. All right. So let's say you have an image, you've seen this stuff before, you've got the global sliders, you've got vibrance, woo, and you've got saturation, right? And these can get things kind of thermonuclear really fast. Now, if you wanted to adjust individual colors, you could do so with this color mixer panel with the HSL adjustments, okay? And this is you've seen before, so you could just say, I want to take the reds down or make the reds go up or the oranges. And this works pretty well, but it works on a global level. So what Adobe did was create a new tool called Point Color, which allows you to click very specific point colors, individual colors that maybe are more refined than any of these ranges, and adjust their hue, saturation, and luminance. So if you go over here where you can see where it says Point Color, it's got an eyedropper, and you just select a color. So let's choose maybe this weird kind of these greens. And then when you click on it, you can see you get this little box and you can use the sliders. You can move these points around, but you can do a hue shift. You can do a saturation shift, and you can do a luminance shift or brightness shift. Okay. So it's like the HSL slider. It's just you can point click on a specific color so that you're not guessing on a range. Now, this by itself is not really earth shattering. But it does have some useful features. So, for example, um, let's just say I had cranked up the vibrance, or maybe I used dehaze to get some of the the sky looking better. When you use vibrance and dehaze, you get a lot of blues. So maybe I want to dial this back so I could go to my point color, like this color, whatever that is, and just dial the saturation down a little bit so that I'm not cranking up those blues. Now that by itself is pretty cool, but I want to show you where the real killer feature is. So I've got an image like this where in the background, I actually like the trees being kind of saturated, but boy, this foreground is overcooked. So I can use the point color editor in combination with the masking tools, which is really, really good because there is no HSL tool in the masking tools. If I just add a mask, and I'm going to just create a mask with a gradient here. So let's just throw a mask on. Okay. So I've selected this foreground. Um, in the past, all you had to work with was you had temperature adjustments, saturation adjustments, and you can kind of get this, pretty well. But what if I just wanted to work the oranges here and leave the greens? Well, now you can expand the point color tool in the masking panel. Click your eyedropper, click this, and just dial back those yellows a little bit in the foreground. And let's say I want to crank the blues up in the foreground. I could add another point color tool, maybe tweak the blues in my foreground. So it gives you the ability to adjust individual colors in your mask. So that is actually really great. That's pretty huge. That's awesome. Okay. The other tool that they added that I find really, really cool is this blur tool. And it's a beta, so it's not even finished yet, okay? But it's pretty darn good. And what it does is it actually creates what's called a depth mask and creates an artificial bokeh you like that. This is the same idea as if you've ever used your phone camera in portrait mode where it tries to blur backgrounds out, and it gives you some control over this. That can be useful both in creative ways, but also just to make maybe a portrait look a little better. So here's a photo of my friend at the working at the bar, and I'm going to go into where it says lens blur. Go back to the picture here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I shot this. This is what it looked like out of the camera. Not too bad. Okay. But I shot this with my micro four thirds camera. It has a little bit greater depth of field than you would get with, say, a full frame camera or a larger sensor camera. So what if you just wanted to add a little blur? So you expand this lens blur. See, it says early access. That's because it's beta. And you click apply, and you can blur out the background. Pretty cool. But what's even better about it is that by default, it uses the AI subject detection. So it finds a subject. But if you want to just place a point where you want to focus, you can use this little point tool. But then you can adjust the focal range. So if I wanted to just focus on the background, I just move this slider over. So you can actually adjust how much is in focus and how much isn't. Now, it's not perfect. You're going to see sometimes weirdness at the edges, and they give you a tool down here where you can add to the focus or add to the blur using a brush. So if I wanted to, let's just say I wanted to focus this one thing back here, I could do that. Well, not something I would normally do, but you get the idea. But the other thing you can do is you can change the look of the bokeh of the out of focus highlights. So you have 5 different choices here. The default, of course, is just the standard round, the round bokeh for the round blurs. But if you wanted to make it look like it was weird bokeh, like rings or this one's the cat's eye bokeh, or those awful donuts that you would get shooting with reflex telephoto lenses in the 70s. You can make different kinds of bokeh, or here's one with 5-bladed aperture. Again, it's all still in beta. I'm guessing there'll be more tools added to this and things be refined over time, but it's really quite awesome. And where it really works nicely is just to take some edge off of a background. So here's a bird, red-winged blackbird, photographed it in Florida earlier this year, and I was using a teleconverter, and I was shooting at effectively f9. Okay, so I wasn't exactly, shooting with an f2.8 lens or an f4 lens, and you can see the out of focus background just isn't great. So if we apply it, I can dial this up and really smooth out the background. Another thing you can do if you want to just play around with this tool is there's a visualizer. So if you want to look at the depth mask, you click visualize depth and check this out. It'll show you based on the colors on here what's in focus, or what areas it chooses for this mask. So you can see the magenta stuff is a little bit further back, and then the farthest background are these dark blue colors. So again, even if I was just taking a little bit of the edge off, you can use that to improve your images. Now, why is that useful? Well, not all of us have super fast glass. Maybe you're doing a portrait, you just want to get a little bit smoother background, or maybe you want to do something totally wild and creative. Like let's go into here's just a shot on up in Canada last week. I could turn the lens blur on this landscape, which I shot at the equivalent of f11, and let it do its thing. Now it's not going to find a subject here, so I'm going to just click this point tool, maybe this rock, and if I want to do stuff where it makes it look like, you know, weird tilt shift kind of images, you can do this with this tool. And considering it's just in beta, that's pretty nice. That's a good tool. Now, one thing I should point out: these operations that require the AI masking algorithms, you need a computer with a good GPU in order to work. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting for a very long time for these effects to update. This is similar to the blur filter that they added in Photoshop in beta, but I actually think this one's a better implementation, the way they give you the control over it with the brushes and the masking tool. So I'm pretty pleased with it so far. Now, the third thing they added in, and this is the one that really isn't something that concerns us, but I'm going to mention it for completeness sake, is the ability to have an expanded dynamic range viewing option on your screen for people who use things like HDR monitors and you're doing HDR capture. So this image is an HDR merge. It's 3 shots that I blended together. And I don't have an HDR monitor. I have a Apple Studio display. It's got a pretty good color gamut, but it's not, you know, a true HDR screen. So what I'm going to show you is just what it is, but I don't recommend using it. Okay, so up here in the basic panel, you can see where you have your adjustments. There's the auto adjust, the black and white. Now they've added a button called HDR, and if you click that, you get this HDR histogram. Okay, and what this will show you is tones that go beyond the normal standard dynamic range display. And if you so choose, you could really, you know, if you wanted to, you could get this full dynamic range. Sounds cool. And if you had an HDR display, it might look really cool. But here's the problem. First of all, your display probably isn't an HDR display unless you've got a ton of money sitting in one of these. So I can show you, like right here by the visualize HDR button, that this stuff here is being clipped on my Apple display. But the other problem is that if you're going to save this out and you've done all this wonderful HDR editing, nobody's got an HDR display to view it on either. So you're back to the problem of having to tone map your image. Now they do give you a cool little tool. Now the tool is down here under the SDR rendition settings part of this panel. You can click this button that says preview for standard dynamic range display. And you can see it kind of looks flat and weak. And if I were to export a JPEG out of this image, this is what it would look like. So what they give you are some tone mapping tools. You can increase brightness, contrast, whites. You can do all these maneuvers to attempt to have the HDR image look good on a SDR traditional JPEG output. Problem is, really, that's not easy to do, and it's a little bit clumsy. So for me, what I would recommend doing is simply keeping your HDR images in standard dynamic range view and just working with them that way, because that way the output that you get is going to look like what is on your screen. But it's there, they added it, and so you know, that's what I know so far. So I'm going to continue to play with these tools and get in there with the um, you know, find better ways to use them. But I do like the keys here, and that is the blur tool is very good, even in its beta phase, for kind of taking an edge off a crunchy background or adding just a little blur to create the illusion of subject separation, a little bokeh. The point color tool can be used in both the global and the local, the masking setting, but where it's most powerful is with those masking tools, because now you can really say, I want to crank up the reds, or I want to do something that isn't just the global saturation or vibrance slider in the case of the AI mask or the masking tool itself. So that's what's new in this current version of Lightroom. And like I said, it's available both in Lightroom Classic, which is what I'm using, but also in the Lightroom CC, which is the web version of Lightroom. They've added those same tools in. So that's what I know so now. So stay tuned for more. If you've got any questions, I'm going to open it up to questions. Just type them in the chat window, okay?